Welcome to the Habits and Hustle podcast, a podcast that uncovers the rituals, unspoken habits, and mindsets of extraordinary people. A podcast powered by Habit Nest. Now here's your host, Jennifer Cohen.
You've been a journalist for many years, and you were the Chief White House Correspondent, and now you are kind of created your own platform. That must be a very big difference in terms of experience with what you're doing.
It's been a huge change, both in terms of like the kind of news I do and just the way I do it. I used to be on the White House lawn with like a camera person, and they did sound and like all these lights and people and producers. And now I'm at home with talking to my phone. So it's definitely a sea change.
Yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, I wanted to ask you, before I even get into all that, like, to get that job, that's a very coveted position. What was the evolution of you becoming the chief correspondent at the White House? Because that's no joke. You must have had I want to know your tricks and your secrets.
So I always wanted to be a White House correspondent. Like when I got out of college, my first job was as an intern in the Clinton White House. I'm dating myself. And I noticed when I was doing that, like how powerful the press was. And I decided I want to be one of those people because what they say can actually shape policy and what happens inside this building. So that was my goal. And I was like young and naive. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I got a job. I went home. Everyone says, go local, go home. I went home and I started writing for LA Magazine, where I am from. And then I got, somebody told me print is going away. You got to do TV. Whatever. Like that's just didn't come true. But I decided to go on TV. I made a fake tape and like marketed myself all over the country and finally got a job in Orlando, Florida. And I moved to Orlando, Florida from LA. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone who knew anyone in Orlando. I landed there without any introductions. And
wow.
It was intense and it was amazing. And my first job was as a one-man band reporter, which means they give you a camera, they give you a map, and then you figure out the story, you drive there, you set up your own interviews, you film them, come home, transcribe them, write your script, edit it, and tape your own stand-up, which, fast forward, is what I do now. So
went full circle.
Big equipment.
Yeah.
From there, I did like your classic news, like career track, where I just kept moving up to higher markets. And at every turn, I'd say I want to cover politics and I want to get to the White House. And it's actually one of the pieces of advice I give people, which is if you know what you want, tell people. Do the work they ask you to do, tell them what you want to do. And that's the way to achieve what your goal is you have to not just know it, but put it out into the world. No,
I agree. Now, you went to Harvard though, right?
For college, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, that's not, you have to have somewhat of like, you have to have some smarts as well, right? Like you come by it honestly. It wasn't like pure hustle. It was, you had the combination, which is amazing. And so did you get your undergrad at Harvard? Then you came back and did this whole thing in Orlando?
Yeah. I got an undergrad at Harvard and then I was a White House intern straight out of school. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, I want to be in Washington and I want to be involved in politics, but in a different way. And then I decided to do this whole thing.
So then this whole thing, right? So then you kind of like work up the ranks, and then you were at ABC for a long time, and then you kind of you won a Peabody Award, an Emmy Award, a Gracie. I saw like you're very accomplished. And then how long were you actually the chief White House correspondent for?
So I got to the White House first at ABC News, where I was the junior White House correspondent covering it for Good Morning America. And that was in 2004, right after Bush was reelected. And I covered things like the Iraq War, the surge, Katrina, all that period of time. And then one thing that happens when you're in the White House press corps is you have the press pool, like all the other press reporters at that time traveled together to, like, if the president was giving a speech in Kentucky, you'd all get on the plane and go. Or if he's giving a speech in, Russia, you'd also get on the plane and go. So you have all these people you're with all the time. It's your crew in a way. And I always saw how the White House correspondent for CNN had all this opportunity to cover all sorts of stories because there was so much airtime at CNN. and I wanted to get to CNN. So I decided to do something that most people at that time didn't do, which is move from the network to cable. It was always considered like,
right,
go to cable, and then you get to the network, and once you're at the network, you never leave.
And you went the opposite direct. You went the opposite,
which is my thing. Like then I'm at cable, and I'm like, I'm going to go on my phone, but I kind of like, you see where things are trending, right? And so why not hop on the trend? Like cable news was happening, and so I left CNN. I went to CNN in 2007. And this is kind of a cool story. I got there in like August, and the presidential election started in November, really. And they said to me, you're new here, but we want to give you a taste of the presidential election. So we're going to send you to the presidential campaign trail in Iowa, but we're going to give you this guy, Barack Obama, who's not going to be in the race for long. He'll be out in a few weeks, a month or two, but he'll give you a little experience, And that's how these things happen. Like I covered then Senator Obama in Iowa before he was even getting momentum. And that was just a remarkable experience.
Oh my gosh. That's how was what was the experience? How was he at that point, at that time?
Super accessible. Like we had a CNN bus that we called the Election Express, and and we spent way too much time on it. And it had a Wii. Do you remember that video game where you could like play?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So Obama's like body man used to come on and use our Wii because he'd like, get a break from everything going on. So Obama came on once and did Wii tennis, and I interviewed him there and talked to him. You just like, Iowa's like this remarkable experience for political reporters where you move there for about 6 weeks. And everyone in Iowa takes their role so seriously as being the first to vote that they're always ready to approach you and tell you what they think about every candidate. One of the things you'll get is you'll say, what do you think of this candidate versus that candidate? And they'll go, I've only met with each of them 3 times, so I haven't yet formed a judgment.
3 times.
You had like access to Barack Obama 3 times, So, but you just saw a movement happen. I remember there was a day, it was a blizzard, and we were all going into a rally that Obama was holding. And there was this like crotchety grandpa man in overalls being dragged there by his granddaughter. And he was annoyed. And he's like, my granddaughter wants me to see the celebrity. And one of the things you do is you interview people as they're walking in, try to get video of them reacting real time. You find them in the crowd and then talk to them as they leave to see their opinion. Oh, so I represented his crotchetiness entering. Partway through the event, I get video of him standing up doing the wave.
That's awesome.
And he signed up to be a block organizer for Obama. Like it just caught fire, and you could see it happen there.
See, I mean, so was he was very charismatic, I would imagine, back then as well, of course. And, or what, I mean, you tell me, because of course he comes across like super like cool, smooth, like your everyday Joe kind of deal, but it's different from your perspective and your experience.
Totally. I mean, the first thing is that he's remarkably intelligent, just like unusually off the charts kind of intelligence that is both just, intellectual understanding, but also like this calm. Mm-hmm. The way chess players can see many moves into the future, he kind of, I think, takes in the world that way and can play things out. And he has a sense of like, change over time that gives him that calm. So that you get that vibe from him. He also is hugely charismatic when he needs to be, super like regular cool when at moments, and then he can get incredibly professorial and monologue-y. And so I used to say, I mean, people would say, what's the most surprising thing about President Obama that people don't know? And I was like, he can be really boring. And they're like, I'm like, oh my God, he can just. So he
on and on, yeah.
But like a college professor explaining to you how it is. And you're like, dude, I need a soundbite. Can you give me something?
Right. Exactly. You're good at that, though. I mean, what I like about your how you kind of deliver your news is that you're able to break it down in layman's terms for people. You're very good with that. I mean, you do. You take complex things and you make it simple enough where people can understand what the hell you're even saying. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that you said that's my whole goal, because I always felt like when I was in Washington covering the news, we used jargon. We always covered it like you've walked into a dinner party 20 minutes after it started. And you're
Yeah.
like, what am I missing? And as a result, we leave a lot of people out. But if you step back and introduce people from the beginning, like here are the players, here's why it matters, here's what this jargon means, you can onboard so many more people to caring and knowing and then participating and voting. And I always thought it was like crazy that we didn't make that effort. And so my whole goal is to explain the stuff in a way anybody can understand, because it's not like hard to get. It's just that we don't give you the tools to get it.
Right. And like, if you don't have like a background to understand, you get lost incredibly fast. Right.
Totally.
So, and especially now with there's information overload, but I think what happens a lot now is like you tend to miss a lot of stories because there's so much information, and then you kind of are like myopic in what you know, and then you don't know anything else, which happens all the time to me.
You nailed it. Like there's no way, like I have a hard time keeping on top of the information, and that's my job. And I'm trained to be like a soldier on the battlefield, surveying digital information coming in at all times, right? Like, I just do that anyway, and I miss stuff. So part of the whole, like I call it news, not noise, because my whole thing is to help you pick the signal out of the noise. Here's what mattered.
So right now then, like, let's just talk about the news for a second, because I feel now all I hear is COVID stuff. Obviously the vaccine now, like it kind of comes in, it morphs itself depending on where you're at. And before it was still is election and COVID and election, and where are the gaps? Like, where is there some stories that we're all really that we just kind of missed because we're so myopic and preoccupied?
I love that question. Yes. Okay. And yet those stories did matter. They mattered. It was important and they were dominant. But the kinds of stories that also matter that don't get told enough are, okay, we've covered all this drama in the White House and at the agencies, say the Environmental Protection Agency, had all these scandals. Got it. But how's your drinking water? Like, what has been the impact of this leadership on you at home?
Yeah.
What has happened? Like, we know a lot about what Trump is tweeting. Do you know what pesticides are now legal that weren't before? And what kind of impact has that had? There's just a story about how construction of the border wall has had these cascade effects on the environment. Like, what's the status of our drinking water? All these things, are vital and crucial, and we don't tell those stories enough. So part of my thing is like, I want to reorient so we tell more of those stories. And also, to be honest, like, eyes up a little bit, what's going on around the world. It's not,
yes.
We never talk about, remember there were all these protests in Hong Kong? What happened, right? Like, what's that? So some of that is the kind of stuff I try to help my audience understand and I think matters. Beyond that, I think some of the most important stories will be the vaccine, COVID, and disinformation going forward.
So wait, I want to touch upon a few of these things. So the first thing is, why is that? Is there like is there somebody at the top or somewhere in these networks or cable networks saying only discuss this? Like, why is it that it's the same information like 47,000 times, but yet these like missing gaps are constant? Like, where is that coming from? Where is the mandate, and why is it not changing?
So it's basically like any industry where something works and then everybody sees they make money doing that thing, and then everybody tries to change to do that thing. And you're like, but I was doing this other thing that worked. And they're like, no, that made money. And it's just a herd, right? So I mean, in cable news, a couple key players decided to do one big story. That the way, like with cable in particular, people focus and then turn off, dip in and dip out, dip in and dip out. And so they repeat a lot because they're assuming you're not watching continuously, you're dipping in and out. And they decided the way to get you hooked is to create one drama around a big story that you can't get enough of.
Like a soap opera.
Yes, exactly like a soap opera. And they literally talk about characters sometimes, like Mitch McConnell's a character, Trump's.
Yes.
These are a recurring family of characters. And you want to know what's going on with each of the characters all the time. And then somebody does that, it works, and then everybody's suddenly doing it. And what's one of the effects? I'll give you an example. Right now, as we're speaking, one of the things that gets covered all the time is that Trump is in a tantrum mood.
Mm-hmm.
And he's planning to try to do something to undo the vote when Congress meets in January to upset the Electoral College. It's on all day long.
All day.
It doesn't matter. The president's mood is not news. But they're so addicted to covering Trump and his drama that even now that they can let it go, they're not.
Why? That's a great point. That's exactly what I was going to ask you. It doesn't matter. And still yet, he's still getting the same coverage. It's like, without him, I feel like that soap opera, like they have to make money off it. They don't make money otherwise because people are, what's happening?
I think that the belief is this is how we make money. And the belief is, I don't think it's true. I don't think it's the only way to do it.
So why are they doing it? Why are they giving him all this airtime even when they don't have to?
Because it's one thing they know works, because they know it works, it's easy, and it's cheap. Because if you're, if you want to go find out what's the status of drinking water in Flint, you have to send a reporter, a producer, a satellite truck, editors, overnight hotel stays, airline tickets, think of all the things to maybe find a story, maybe not. And that's a 3-minute piece. But if you just want to talk about Trump's mood, all you have to do is like call some people up, ask them to drive from their home into the set and talk. And you can get in their ear and direct things for hours. You have it's producing a show as opposed to sending people out to create journalism. Now, I don't want to say that alone because there's some remarkable journalism happening, and especially at the newspapers. And I'll tell you, like, my mother texted me this week to say, I've been looking at all the newspapers and I noticed nobody has the word Trump on the front page today for the first time in forever. So it's starting
That's a big moment.
Starting to change.
It is, but I think that's a great way brilliant way to say it. Like, it really is like a soap opera, and it's kind of, that's why it's like they hook you in. They get you that it's like that emotional juggernaut, and then you want to follow. Well, what's that? Who is he going with? What's happening with her? And it is also a mood thing, right? Because it's like this up and down emotional roller coaster of where we are. And when did it change? When did it become that? Like, at what point? I feel like, was it always like that? I just wasn't aware because I was younger. What is it?
I mean, the news changed at a bunch of junctures. There was, in the early 70s, when news first started, it was a public service. It was because the government gave networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, the access to the airwaves. And in return, they had to create news as a public service. So it was a loss center. Then in the 70s, CBS created 60 Minutes, and it became a profitable show. And they saw they could make money off news. And that started to change how the news worked. It became more of a business. Then fast forward to the morning shows, Today Show and all those exploded, huge money makers, at the same time that mega corporations bought networks. And so they weren't just networks anymore. They were subsidiaries of shareholder-owned corporations that had to report profit on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. So ratings became part of your profit reporting. And instead of thinking long-term journalism, you thought, what do I have to do to increase the ratings today so the next shareholder report shows us doing well?
Right.
So that's something. And then when CNN came along, it made that drama thing where we were focused on one event, all like ubiquitous. That was everywhere.
Yeah.
And then all these other cable networks emerged and became competitive and started doing this panel discussion stuff because it's so much cheaper than being out in the world. And so you have all these forces, like the move to profit, the shortening of the amount of time you have to show your profit, right? And then like wanting to just do it fast, cheap, and loud to drive as much ratings as possible. We ended up
No, it's true, because even with talk shows, I've noticed over the time, like, even they've all now evolved and morphed into, even if they're supposed to be like health related or this or that, they're all just about now, like just fighting and, the lowest common denominator you can possibly find, because that's supposedly what gets the ratings.
Yes.
It's like Real Housewives on all of the talk shows.
1,000%. And the thing to know about that is that gets the ratings from people who are home watching TV.
Right.
People who are on their couch flipping, maybe they'll stop. But it leaves out a huge, huge audience, which is people who are too busy to be at home on their TV, people who are on their phone.
Right.
And they want something different. They do not want that endless panel of people shouting. And I think that's a great opportunity and cause for hope that we can like re-engineer the way we provide information so that it's short bites that inform you and keep you feeling okay, like locked in. Like there's a confidence and empowerment that comes from feeling informed. And that's addicting.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, like, I guess, and that's a good dovetail into what you're doing, because that's for sure. Because now, especially, people are now, they want to have the new, what do you call it? News, not noise, right? You give the news, not noise, because I want to just know the news. I don't have time to kind of decipher for myself this, that, and the bias is the other problem. Like, where do you go? And that's what I was going to ask you, is because, every network is skewed, right? You have, and so sometimes I don't know who to kind of, to kind of like lean towards, right? Because one says the other one's not telling the truth. One says the other one's lying. And so really, like, at the end of the day, I just want to have some news so I'm informed, but I don't need to hear all the other stuff that's going around and the bias. I mean, we all have bias, right? But as least amount of bias possible,
I always say, like, try to be transparent, try to give people the information. And so, like, empower them to make up their own minds.
Right.
It's been hard lately because, it's not a secret that President Trump lies a lot, doesn't traffic in a lot of facts. And so as a journalist, you're constantly fact checking him, and that can look partisan to people who are watching, right? Mm-hmm. You're constantly saying that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. But it's not right or left. It's just fact and not fact.
Right. Fact, not fact. Exactly.
And so that's one challenge, is to like help the audience understand. And one of the ways I've navigated that is I say to my audience, like, this is super uncomfortable because, for another time this week, I have to come here and tell you this thing he said isn't true. It makes me feel uncomfortable that I'm constantly saying that, but that's my job. So here's my sources and how I know. And people respond to that. Like when I'm transparent about the larger situation it puts us in as journalists and how they might be receiving it.
Well, right. That's the thing. I mean, authenticity, transparency. Where do you get your sources? Like where? So let's start with that. So then you come from this humongous job, where you have a huge crew. And then you said, like yourself, you then are now doing it in your backyard on your phone. I mean, what was that like? What was that transition like for you? And then how are you kind of doing it? Like, explain the process.
So I left, and then I wrote a novel. And while I was writing the book, which took a while, all my friends are
it's called Savage News, right? Yeah.
That was fun. And it was like a needed diversion. And, like after all this zaniness, just like to sit quietly and write was radically changed. But
is it based on real facts, though? Loosely based?
It's inspired by, things that I witnessed and lived and my friends did.
Okay, so just tell people. So it's called Savage News. It's a fictional book inspired by story that we've seen.
It's a novel. It's funny, and it's about a young female reporter who's serious, and she's trying to break real news stories inside a network that doesn't want serious news, and that wants to, just get ratings, and she is competing with like all the craziness of that, including, she breaks news and does her work, and her management wants to talk to her about her hair. And they're constantly harping on like, why isn't your hair looking flat or good? Or there's a whole chapter on her dealing with her hair, which is very real.
I love books like that. I love the morning show. I'm sure you saw the morning show. You watched it. I love stuff like that. Even if it's very loosely based, I find it to be super entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what this was.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so I didn't mean to digress. Okay, continue with what you were saying. You were saying you were the process of transitioning from this big job as chief White House correspondent for CNN, then now in your backyard and all that stuff.
So I had this thesis that I talked to you about, that the news should be told differently for this different audience. And I did all the things. Like I went, and I'm from LA, so I met with producers and I met with studio people, and I was like, we should do a show that does this. And everyone's like, oh no one wants news, or nobody wants politics, or there'll be no audience for that, or people only want conflict, or they like the panels and there's no other way to do it. And I just kept going around getting no, until my friends were like, stop asking for permission, just do it. And I'm like, where? And they were like, on your phone right here. And I remember I was at lunch with somebody, and she asked me what was going on in Congress, and I told her. And then she said to me, when are you going to start on your phone? And I'm like, I don't know what to say. And she's like, what you just told me. Like, you just explained a thing. Do that. And then one day I was like, enough people started saying it that one day I invited someone over to help me tape this. And I was like, I don't want to do it. I changed my mind. And she's like, I'm just not leaving until you do it. So that first thing was that was the impossible barrier, because it was such a weird, and I did it in 2018. I was like, nobody was doing news on Instagram then.
Right. Nobody, at all.
And it was like, this is, nobody's going to get what I'm doing. And somebody asked me, like, how did you keep going? And I said, well, I did the first one and I didn't die. So I knew I could do it again.
Right. That's a good way of looking at it, right? Like you didn't die, so you might as well just keep on going.
It's like nothing smote me. So
yeah. And then what happened? So then, like, you're like, okay, I'm going to do it again. Did you have how many people were watching it, or like you and your friend, or? I
think I just sort of organically at that point had like 700 or 800 followers, and a couple of people messaged me like, oh, that was, what are you up to? How are you? And then my few friends that were really on me to do this, were all so supportive that they're like, you have to do another one. And they made me do it. The funny thing was, I was in my backyard when I shot it, and they were like, that's amazing. Next time, maybe you want to be indoors. Because they're like, it looks like you're captive in the Colombian jungle.
You live and learn, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And so you do it on Patreon? Is that what you're doing?
I do this on Instagram, and then
don't you have a Patreon account?
Yeah.
No. Oh, you do.
And people support it on Patreon, and then part of what you get with Patreon is I do Zooms where
okay, yeah, that's what it is.
Can show up and ask questions, and the questions I'm getting lately are like, people keep forwarding me articles saying, how scared should I be about
right. And so how are you so are you just you're a news hound, like you're going to everywhere? Like who are your sources? What are you doing? Like, how do you kind of get the news that you're going to share and then break it down?
Well, first of all, I have relationships from having been a reporter for so long. So I talk to people and I firsthand gather information. And I have like a little kitchen cabinet that when I don't really feel a story, I'll ping them and be like, what do you think the story is today? Or should I do this or that? But also, it's like when you have your 10,000 hours, I've built a Twitter feed. I have like a set of places, of resources I go to. I just scan the landscape in a way that is muscle memory for me.
Yeah.
Where I hear things and see something and I'm like, that's a story. Like, that's moving away. That's moving off. We shouldn't look at that. We need to do this. Or this is right. You vibe it after a while.
Right. Like it's what you do. It's second nature.
Yeah.
And like, also it's a very, your business or the news business, it's a very competitive business. I'm sure when you were doing this as a course, like, are people all vying for like the first person to like break a story, or like, what was that experience like? And, are you happy to be away from it, or is it still kind of like that? Like, what is it? Like, tell us.
It's a weird combination. Everybody's extremely competitive to break news. and book guests. That's a big competitive thing. Like, who's going to get the get? But you also like live such a strange existence as a political reporter because you're like, it's incredibly intense and you're always on, that there's also a camaraderie among reporters. So you compete for the scoop, but there is a really like supportive vibe there. And it does get, the competition is much more like inside networks, or who's getting this slot, or who's going to be anchoring, or what is that person is there? What does that mean? They just sent them that story. All that game happens.
Right.
I'm glad to be out and doing my thing because I wouldn't have wanted to cover the incremental developments inside the Trump White House. I wouldn't want to be like, he's in a bad mood now, or he did this on Twitter. I think it's noise. I don't think it helps. I think it's not the purpose of journalism. But it's hard to say that one should ignore what the president's doing. So for me, it worked a lot better, like to be outside explaining, giving people like a big picture in context, what this means, what matters, what doesn't. And I have one of the cool things about Instagram is, unlike when I was on camera for big networks where you're talking to sometimes millions of people, when the light goes off and you're done with your live shot, you have no idea how it went over. And in Insta, I'm like I say, in my backyard or my room, but I immediately get like, I didn't know what that word meant. Here's an article. Oh my God, in my local community, you need to talk. And there's this conversation that happens that makes it all worthwhile.
So I guess I'm going to say, do you like it? Do you like this experience? Are you having a good time with it? What are give me some things that are working well. What kind of things are like kind of you're still trying to figure out? It's a new medium for you. So,
I mean, the part that I love is
the instant.
I like the experience of taking something complicated and showing people they can get it, like making it accessible. I feel like a lot of flow and joy in that. I also like being able to decide. I don't have to get anyone's approval to decide what my story is or what matters and what doesn't. And
That's a big one. I think just in that alone, people would be interested to follow you or like listen, because right away you're not getting paid by some big, conglomerate to kind of like skew the news that way.
And even just like a boss to say, this is what I think is going to rate today. And it's all the things, right? So for me, that's super satisfying, and the engagement with the audience, the instant feedback. And it's been really lovely. Like, one of the things that I found out after this year, and this was a goal, is to help more people like get engaged, register, participate, and vote. And at the end of the election cycle, I found out 27,000 people said that they hadn't voted in the last cycles, but did this year because of News Not Noise. So
wow, that's a big amount.
It made me really psyched. So those are the good things. The bad things are every decision's up to me. It's the same thing. Like, who do I go to on the days that, sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to decide,
Yeah.
And I miss the camaraderie of a newsroom and the experience of having, like, first of all, I mean, CNN's just amazing. Like, I want to do this story, and then the infrastructure and support and ability to do things there is remarkable. And just being able to go to my, I used to sit in between Dan Abash and Gloria Borger and be like, you guys, do you think this is the angle or is that? And just to have the conversation.
Yeah.
That's the stuff I miss.
And so how long were you at CNN, and when did you leave in 2018? Is that when you left?
I was there for, I think 7 years, and I was at ABC for 4 before that. So I was in DC for about like 10 years. And I left as we were gearing up I left ahead of the 2016 election.
Oh, okay. So what did you do between 2016 and you wrote the book? I know, Savage News.
I took a break. First, and then I wrote the book, which I thought would be really fast, and turns out it took forever. It is not easy to write a novel. Oh my God.
No. Did you write it by yourself, or did you have help?
I finally, what helped is that I hired an editor. And anybody who's writing a book for the first time, I would so recommend it, because you have someone to send pages to, and then they respond and send them back. just the conversation helps you get stuff done.
Yeah, no, I would imagine. I had, I've written a few books, and if I didn't have the I had editors and stuff, but I could not imagine doing it alone. It's a huge project, and it's time consuming, very, very time consuming.
I mean, it was, yeah. And I worked with a couple different editors, and they were amazing. If I write again, it'll be nonfiction.
Yeah, exactly. So can you give me some things? I know you said the water. Can you tell us about the water? Because I'm curious. You were saying the water quality of the water we're drinking. Can you give us some information on that, and anything else that we like beside anything that, like I said, those missing gaps? By the time this airs, it's going to be probably no one's going to know anyway. But a couple of things that we can keep our ears and eyes out for, that we're just, because of how it works, we're missing.
I think that how your water is a hyper local thing. And so we would have to answer that on a case by case, but there's still problems in Flint, Michigan. There are a number of pesticides that were deregulated.
That was the one.
By the Trump administration, one in particular that is proven to cause brain damage in children. And they barred it because, like, migrant workers, they wouldn't want them to interact with it and bring it home to their kids. And then the Trump administration made it legal again. There are a whole bunch of things like this that have happened, and that everybody, myself included, has been too busy to sort of find what's really gone on since this happened. The Biden administration has vowed to undo all those things, restate those regulations. But it's important that journalists go out and find out, what has been the effect. And one of the interesting things about the Biden administration is they made clear that climate change is going to be a priority in all their conversations, even in negotiations with foreign adversaries and foreign partners. Mm-hmm. So I think the environment and climate are going to be massive topics to follow on the domestic level, like you at home and around the globe. I think that infrastructure repairs, as sort of boring as that sounds, actually isn't, because it means everybody complains about the road as they drive to work, right? Or bridges that are so narrow that there's crazy traffic. All those things, when they talk about infrastructure, that's what they're talking about. Makes your life easier. So my kind of suggestion is people get interested in the stuff that might sound boring at first, but that's the stuff that is really interesting because it totally impacts your life. Environmental policy, infrastructure, immigration. These things are going to be changing, and we should all notice.
Yeah. And you cover all of that stuff, right?
I cover a little bit every day so that it's digestible.
Digestible. Okay. And then, so do you have are you going to have you don't have a podcast that I know of, do you?
I don't have a podcast.
I'm surprised, because you're a perfect person to have a news podcast to kind of, that would be an evolution of IG, wouldn't it be? Or
I just have to decide what's the next thing to do. And is it that? Is it, where do you do those things?
So how do people follow you and get more information on, just tell us your information so people can kind of get those little news snippets and sound bites. The news, not the noise.
The news, not the noise. You can find it on Instagram at Jessica Yellin, Yellin. My Patreon is News Not Noise on Patreon. And we're starting a newsletter soon, so that can come to your inbox. But the main thing is I do, in Instagram, I post stories every day, kind of like a news roundup. Feed posts on what's going on, and I do a video a few days a week and live interviews with real experts and newsmakers about what's going on in the world. My videos aim to help break down one big topic in the news in a way that helps you both understand it and know why it matters to you.
I love that. It's such a disruptive thing to do. I really kind of admire that you've done it this way. It's like you came, like you said, you went from you went to cable from the what do you call them, the networks. Sorry, networks to cable. You're doing everything as a disruptor, and it's going to work. And listen, look at CNN now; it's massive. So I wish you all the best with what you're doing. I love it. I mean, even in the short period of time that I've known about it, I've really kind of was able to kind of decipher much more in a small amount of time. So thank you for being on my podcast, being on Habits and Hustle. And I really look forward to kind of following this journey with you.
Thank you so much for your kindness and for having me on. This is really a treat.
No, absolutely. I appreciate it. And don't be a stranger. Maybe you can come on once in a while and just kind of give me some like breakdown of like news. So, or all of us, because, you know, we were all, like I said, very myopic on like 2 topics or one. And then when we don't know what's going on, it's actually kind of like to kind of keep us abreast of the situation, basically.
That sounds really fun. I'd love it.
Thank you so much. And have a great night.
You too. Take care.
Habits and hustle, time to get it rolling. Stay up on the grind, don't stop, keep it going. Habits and hustle, from nothing into something. All out, hosted by Jennifer Cohen. Visionaries, tune in, you can get to know them. Be inspired, this is your moment. Excuses, we ain't having that. The Habits and Hustle podcast, powered by Habit Nest.